the developed countries on issues to do with climate change. So we're supposed to come up with mechanisms on how to hold these the developed countries accountable. And we also need to look at, in terms of advocacy, we also need to look at how can African countries have more of verified bodies to allow continental verification of green projects. So there are certain processes and certain that we have to go through for us to at least access other funds that are not just grants, some other loans or other climate financing, climate funding. So we have to make sure that at least we have verified mechanisms or bodies that are able to control climate finance in Africa. And also, there is also need to, I think this is all that I have. Oh, sorry. And then there is the private sector that we also have to take to look at as well and make sure that we work together, because when we're looking at climate financing, it's more focusing on the public sector. So at least if we try as CSOs, as the government, to at least make the private sector be involved in issues to do with climate change, I think it can be something that we can work on in order to make sure that we achieve the climate action goal. I think this is all that I can say.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Frank, for the amazing presentation. I'm sure Frank touched quite a lot in terms of the challenges that we are experiencing in terms of accessing climate finance. I'll try to draw the discussion to focus at country level in terms of where we are and what we really need to do, and also how we can also, through the opportunities that are coming with climate change, we can also help to not increase our debt, try to be a bit smart, because there are also opportunities through climate finance. Frank mentioned or highlighted the available climate finances which are there. I would maybe start by saying that issues of climate finance are actually outlined in Article 9 of the Paris Agreement. So the finance is actually divided in three formats. Frank talked about the adaptation finance. There's also mitigation finance, and also I think the third one, which is the red, which is reducing emissions and deforestation and degradation finance mechanism. I think I'll start with the red finance. Most of us, we are aware of the oil exploration project, which is bound to start. There was a mention about it. So there are actually other three projects which have actually been commissioned in the area where this exploration is going to be happening. So under the red finance mechanism, communities are involved in terms of being involved in reforestation activities and also afforestation activitis. And under that mechanism, they'll be sort of like selling what they would call carbon credits. I think this would require from the look of the things, it seems simple. I know that we have got another project, the Red Plus project in Kariba. It seems simple because actually it's simple in the sense that community have to just grow trees. And if they grow trees, they preserve the forest. If they preserve the forest, there are going to be calculations which are going to be made and to calculate in terms of how much emissions they are reducing in terms of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and communities have to be paid on that. But it is actually complex in terms of agreeing, because it is also the developed nations that will then determine the pricing, and in that effect, it has some challenges, but still, it's an opportunity, it's a window through climate finance, which is available and which involves the communities. Then also moving on in terms of the mitigation finance, I think this is the most crucial, because this is where all the money on climate finance is going. Under the Paris Agreement, there's been established a funding mechanism called the Green Climate Finance, the GCF. Under the GCF, developed countries have pledged a 100 billion funding mechanism annually to support developing countries to meet their mitigation obligation. And for Zimbabwe, I would say as a country, we have also done well because we now have what we call the NDCs, which are the nationally determined contribution, which are just our ambitions as a country in terms of what we want to be doing in terms of contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. And I would say from the revised NDCs, as Zimbabwe, we require about 4.8 billion to meet our targets. And this is anticipated to be achieved by 2030. You would see that already as a country, we are already struggling in terms of setting up local funding mechanisms to support this. So it would mean that we will be requiring, or will be more like depending on mitigation finance. And on mitigation finance, in terms of how this is divided, most of it, the mitigation finance is going to come through bilateral loans. And it is also going to come through the bonds, equity, and the guaranteed credit lines, which Frank earlier on presented on. And as a country, we are lacking on so many facets. In terms of our governance issues, I'm glad that in the morning there have been some talk that we can't be talking about debt offsetting without addressing the ZETERA issues. Those are the critical issues, and those are the ones that are giving an image of us as a country to whoever would want to invest in our country. And as such, you are realizing that what we are having in terms of climate finance opportunities, most of the funds are coming through China, and you would realize that most of some of these funds, they're actually not, they're actually bad deals, so to speak about. And instead of giving us an opportunity to address some of the developmental challenges which are having, it's already also worsening, because now we are left in a situation where we are now involved in bad deals. Then I would also say in terms of how we are also positioning ourselves in terms of, I think the other challenge as a country which we are likely going to face is the challenge on handling of these climate finances if we are to access them. Frank rightfully mentioned that so far, as a country, under the GCF, we have 2 approved climate projects, which are worth close to 35.4 million. But up to date, only 3.9 million has since been dispersed. And of that has been dispersed, it is also very difficult, particularly for civil society, to also track and say and ascertain that of the 3.9 that is actually been channeled to the country, what has it been utilized for? Was it on mitigation? If it's on mitigation, which projects exactly on adaptation, which is also still, I think, the transparency issue in terms of handling of these finances still also remain a challenge. But I would say as a country also there is an opportunity through the climate bill, which is under parliament and under discussion. We are hoping that through the climate bill, some of these challenges in terms of handling of these climate finances will be addressed. I was fortunate that I participated in one of the workshops where the Climate Change Management Department and also the Ministry of Finance, there was also a heated discussion in terms of who has the mandate or the rightful mandate to handle these climate finances. With the Minister of Finance saying, due to them being the Minister of Finance, they have the national mandate of handling all national finances. And also now there have also been some challenges, because we know for sure that there's also other funds like the carbon tax, which has been collected. This was facilitated through the EMA Act. And as a country, we have been also collecting this carbon tax, but very little has been done with these funds to sort of like respond to some of the challenges that has been arising as a result of emissions. And because of that, still to ascertain how much is being collected under the carbon tax and how much has been utilized still remains a very big challenge. And I think these are some of the real issues that also needs to be addressed as we talk about climate finance and the role it can also play in terms of developing our country and also even servicing reducing the burden of us borrowing to support some of the national programs. I would say that this is what I can share for now.
So, colleagues, not only is this panel interesting in that we now have gender balance, as it were, but the face of the youth. For me, it's quite interesting. So as we talk about sustainable development and the 3 Ps within it, which is people, prosperity, planet, I think our planet is in good hands because the youth really are conversant around the issues. Do we have any interventions? I see a hand. 1, 2. Okay. So let's start with those 2, 3. Let me start with the 2 and then I'll come to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for such a nice presentation. Mine is more of a question. Now that we realize that there is mismanagement of funds, there is misallocation of funds, won't we have another challenge if we then receive those funds from the green bonds or for climate finance to increase the debt that we are carrying today? And if that is the case, how best can we prevent that? Because really we need those funds. But now learning from the government that it can change the function of those funds that are used to other activity, would you advise us to take those bonds? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Again, grade 7 logic. If you want to develop, you must industrialize at a large scale, and that is a fact. And you need cheap energy to industrialize. And right now, coal and other fossil fuels are the most economic option. Solar is definitely not the most economic option. Wind energy is not the most economic option at an industrial scale. But then, if we get finance to grow trees and to not grow industry, are we not setting ourselves up for economic failure in the future? Is this climate finance system not a neo-colonial tool to keep Africa backward? Because to me, at face value, it does not seem to make sense, whereby you are being given money to grow trees whilst other countries are growing their industry and polluting the world.
I'm beginning to realize that the elephant in the room that we spoke of earlier might now have a smaller child elephant. In that, whilst I was hopeful that we would be able to go beyond just talking about the need to know how much we owe, we need to then start to proffer ideas on how best we can move away from where we are. And I like the idea around creating a climate change management fund, which is a one-stop shop for us to stop borrowing when we have climate change disasters. Because one of the biggest challenges is that we continue to borrow, even when we are already overborrowed, which is why earlier in my short presentation, I highlighted the need to start addressing some of the challenges that push us to borrow by harnessing resources that are in country. So I applaud the idea to start working around ring-fencing resources that we have already and create a climate change management fund, which allows us to respond to some of the climate change-induced disasters that we experience. Right now, we are at the mercy of bilateral supporters in Chimanimani. I've been doing a lot of work in Chimanimani in the absence of the likes of UN agencies that are working there, rehabilitating roads and doing other. Just a few weeks back, they installed climate change warning systems to to make sure that at least early warning signs are visible before disaster strikes. All that is not our money. It is money that is coming from others. We don't know at what cost, and we don't know to what extent that burden will be borne by future generations. So for me, my strong recommendation is that before we can leave, let's try to proffer as many alternatives to safeguard us. To stop. At least I know in principle, if you are in debt, they usually say stop digging. Before you know how deep the hole is, just stop digging where you are. Then you can establish how much you owe, but for a start, let's stop digging. How do we do that? Let's try to identify ways of making sure we have the resources that we need. Climate change is not about to go away anytime soon. And it will not go away because we have grown 1 million trees or 10 million trees. There are issues that we need to address as people in Africa, and there are also issues that we need to address within our communities, particularly communities that are vulnerable to climate change disaster issues. So my parting shot is that I applaud the need to put together resources that will just sit there, whether they go into a revolving investment fund to prepare ourselves for climate change disasters, so that we don't have to borrow on the day of the funeral. Thank you.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask you not to part, but to profile your recommendation. You have given us one, right, about this fund that you're talking about. Any other recommendation that you have?
There's an area that we are missing in terms of, I like the idea of literacy. And unfortunately, we don't have as many experts as we would want who are able to articulate climate change issues to the extent that ordinary citizens can understand. Those of you who have to Chimanimani and other low-lying areas, you appreciate the challenges of locals who are building houses on slopes of mountains. And those are the ones who are in the majority were affected by the disaster. So there are certain basics that our people need to begin to understand about how to prepare themselves without money, without government interference, to just say, as a community, how best can we take advantage of indigenous knowledge systems and try to address climate change issues in our own community.
Thank you. Can I come back to the panel? Yeah. Let's respond.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I will start with the last comment. Yeah, on the Climate Finance Management Fund, yeah, I think most of the issues, we are still waiting for the Climate Bill, because I think the Climate Bill is also going to assist in terms of how this fund is going to be operationalized to start with, and also how some of these funds are going to be managed. Then I think there was also a reaction in terms of the RED Plus financing. I think, like I highlighted, in terms of understanding climate finance, the RED Plus financing is one mechanism. But in terms of there's also the mitigation financing mechanism, which is where a lot of money is actually being channeled through. Because this is where you would find these mega solar projects being also supported. This is where you are also finding a lot of innovations. There's now e-mobility. I'm glad that also is a country. I read recently that we are also in the process of coming up with a strategy. One thing which is certain is the world is moving. Things are changing. Of course, in the late years, which is why we are in this crisis of climate change, they've developed their economies using the low cost, which was coal and so forth. But it's a reality now. The world is moving away from coal. We might, as a country, want to stick, because I remember also as we were doing the revised NDCs during the consultative processes, back then China had not declared that they were now moving away from financing coal. And as we were putting up our NDCs, like I mentioned earlier on in my presentation, that NDCs, these are more like national priority targets in terms of how we are going to be developing. As a country, now we have got a low emission developing strategy, which incorporates the issues that are contained in the NDCs. And we had not factored as a country then that maybe they were going to wake up and one day there's no finance for coal. But we are prioritizing that we need to expand our Wange And it's not only about finance, but even the technology to support that. As a country, we are not yet there where we can say we can come up with our own technology. So the world is moving. We might need to stick there, but what we now need to do as a country is now to reposition ourselves and say, from what the available opportunities, financing and mitigations, the loans and grants which are available, how can we then position ourselves to have a competitive advantage and also compete with India, with other developing countries that are having access to that fund, and which is what civil society have also been encouraging our government to say this is how we need to be moving. But we also need to address the fundamentals, the governance issues which have been repeatedly been mentioned in the morning, because these are the issues that would also even make us a competitive party in terms of accessing these finances. I have also had an opportunity to have some discussions with AfCODD. AfCODD, they normally have what they call country partnership strategic frameworks, where they would support with some funds towards development work. One of the key issues which they also look at is the risk factor of a country. And as a country, Zimbabwe, we're actually doing bad. We need to get ourselves also to be in a position where we can also be able to be fundable. So then I would also say, apart from just the mitigation fund, there is also opportunities in terms of the grants under the GCF for adaptation. As a country, I would say, in terms of what we need, it is contained in the National Adaptation Plan. Our National Adaptation Plan have some key priority projects that we would need some support. And as a developing country, under the Paris Agreement, it is the obligation of the developed country to also support developing country, and Zimbabwe is also part of that. Why? Because of the historical emission history, because climate change, which we are contending with right now, has been a cause of industrial revolution that has happened in the developed country economies. So for that reason, they are entitled also to be supporting and channeling funds. And these funds are pledges, and they are there through the GCF fund. And we need to position ourselves well such that we have access to this financing.
Yeah, okay. I think actually you've touched quite a lot. But I will probably attempt to tackle two of the issues that have been raised here. The first one being, isn't climate finance a neo-colonial tool? So climate change issues are actually political in nature at so many levels. It's one thing that I also realized when I entered into the climate change thematic area. You know, so you see, when it comes to even commitments around, financial commitments, is laid out in the Copenhagen Agreement to say you are going to put aside 100 billion for developing countries to access. Some other countries might not actually be willing to do that. And I mean, for your own information, I don't think they've been able to fund that facility to more than 10 billion. I don't think so. So it's a political issue, but so it has to be just. So as an institution, we're running a program which is called Just Energy Transition, which you will also read about later on. But so Just Energy Transition speaks to exactly what you have asked to say when we say, when developed countries say stop using coal or oil, for instance, and use cleaner energies, which might be slower in developing our societies. Is that something that we're comfortable in doing? So it's a position that as a government and as a people should take. And the position that we've taken is that it has to be just. It has to be contextual. It has to reflect and meet the contextual needs of our societies. So for instance, you're not going to stop using coal today because we've got a child who is in Mzarabani there who wants maggots, which is being powered by coal. So it has to be just in a way to say, how can we also build our societies using cleaner energies, but not being rushed to actually stop using fossil fuel powered energy. So it's a matter of not being an extremist as well. Because if you're an extremist, you're just going to say, even if we use coal, it's okay. There's no climate change, it's climate variability. It happened 200 years ago. So it's a matter of understanding the realities of climate change, to say this is happening. And it has to be give and take situation for our societies and for those that are already developed, like what Archie has said. Then when it comes to the issue of us being having a weaker monitoring system of the funds that we intend to get from the GCF, from the GEF, from wherever. Maybe Tafadzo will come in here when he talks about the anti-corruption mechanisms. It's one thing that is deterring developed countries, or maybe even private investors, to give resources to Zimbabwe and other countries like us to invest in cleaner energy technologies, which, by the way, are actually effective in other countries. So without an effective anti-corruption mechanism, then it's going to be very difficult to access those funds. It is a reality which has also been talking about in the morning. So as much as we might want even those grants and donations, which we don't have to pay back, you still need to have an anti-corruption mechanism. You need to have a governance, infrastructure that works. That's why I said it's a governance and political issue. So we need to ensure that our governance and political standpoint is on point, so that we can access those resources. Otherwise, we might not get them, at the expense of others. You would see that countries that are closer to us. I know South Africa is actually, has got a very good deal which they're going to get in the next few months, probably, of investing in hydrogen gas. Because they've demonstrated probably to some extent that they've got stronger governance mechanisms, which we do not have as a country. So I think that is where we need to tie the bolts. Otherwise, we might lose out to these free funds. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just add. I think another issue on accessing climate finance is that it's more like we lack more of viable project pipeline. So at the end of the day, we have a challenge in matching projects with the funding opportunity. So I think it is a recommendation that we create better financial mechanisms in order to access this climate finances. And also, I think some of these, like I said, some of these projects we only rely on grants, which is cash transfer and in-kind support, which do not require repayment and interest. So at the end of the day, to assess other green funds, there is need to assess such the green funds. Sometimes we really have poor markets, and it's quite expensive for African countries to acquire this. So there's need for us to, I think, create a better financial mechanism in order to tap into other climate finance funding. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll leave one last intervention from Samuel.
Thank you very much to the panelists and the presenter. I think that was very comprehensive and educative. There is an issue that was raised by Dr. Sila. It's a big issue, Madam Chair. There is a big debate globally on that issue, and I think there was an attempt by the panelists to really engage it. It's a big debate in the sense that it has got a history. The climate issue has got a historical background. The rest of the world that today are promising climate funding, climate financing, have developed using the same resources. The resources that we have in abundance in Africa. And now they've developed, like he said. And true, if we continue using them, really, the climate is a problem. But there's a dilemma in the sense that we need to use them. So, if we don't use them, we will be subalternized, marginalized, like he said. So as a part of demarginalization agenda by Africa,
we must demand and not request. If we request and have arms going around begging them to give us, to pay for their climate debt, because the climate, they've killed the world. So we need to demand. If they don't, we all must always threaten to go ahead and produce the energies from our resources. So it's a big, big debate in the US in the last elections, which some of you would recall. The elections were fought on a number of issues, but one of the issues was the energy, where Biden was saying, the Texas and the other that belt should not produce oil. And those who are saying, we want to produce oil. Today we have the similar problem in Ukraine and Russia, where Russia is now turning off its oil and gas. Now the rest of the world is saying, maybe let's go back to our coal and start producing. Because if we don't, we will starve or we will be frozen. So the debate is really deep, and it will be very interesting at some point if we can have a conference like this one dedicated to climate justice and climate debt. That will be very interesting. But I thank you for the insights, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. I remember the president, I think, which is the last COP that he attended, was it COP or was it some class? And he was saying exactly that. They developed using the same. We shall use our resources. So I suppose you are right. We need to have a debate. Thank you very much. Let's give them another round of applause. Thank you very much for that informative session. Tafadzwa, can you find your way up to the podium and take us through the reflections on contract transparency in state-owned enterprises, procurement in relation to debt management? While you are doing that, do we have PRAS and SAC representation? They are not there. Oh, okay. So we all should be prepared then to engage with Tafadzwa when he is done. So Tafadzwa, please take us through.
It's very difficult to speak after lunch, especially for some of us who eat a lot during lunch hour. So I will try to speak despite the full stomach. So I tried to change my topic slightly, but I think it's still speaking to the same. Contract transparency in state-owned enterprise procurement, reflections on debt management in Zimbabwe. I think it was the other way around, but I tried to put it differently. So, yeah, I'll try to run through the slides, hoping that I'll be making sense. So, I think you agree with me that state-owned enterprises, they have a very critical role to play in terms of promoting socio-economic development. In as much as we are talking about their role in public debt, I think we still need to acknowledge that when properly managed, they have a very critical role to play in promoting socio-economic development. And of course, in the form of provision of public goods and services to the nation, and also in terms of provision of public and social infrastructure services. I think you recognize the role of ZESA and postal and telecommunication I think before the use of WhatsApp, I think you would understand the use of postal and telecommunication. And of course, in the 90s, state-owned enterprises in parastatals in Zimbabwe, they were contributing over 40% of our GDP as a country. But of course, in recent years, a lot has been happening owing to poor performance of the same institutions, but at the same time also owing to deteriorating macroeconomic conditions of our country. So, having that in mind, I think we need to also understand a little bit around where are we dropping the ball in terms of the role of state-owned enterprises in terms of socio-economic development. I think the crisis in terms of our state-owned enterprises is a historical problem. I think over the years we've had scandals, and most of them, they are corruption-related and poor governance in state-owned enterprises. I think Doc can attest to that. And of course, you agree with me that most of the state-owned enterprises in Zimbabwe have been operating below suboptimal levels for a very long time, and even now they are still at that. And of course, this is owing to poor governance and primarily attributed to appointment of the CEOs on political patronage, in which our governance system is structured in a way that state-owned enterprises are used as conduits for corruption or for primitive accumulation. And of course, the poor performance of state-owned enterprises compromises on public service delivery. And you would agree with me that the poor performance of the GMB failed to guarantee food security for our country, to the extent that we see Zimbabwe importing maize. And I would speak on and on in relation to other state-owned enterprises. The performance of Air Zimbabwe, cars, and other institutions. And then you find the government over-subsidizing state-owned enterprises. And that's where the conversation around state-owned enterprises and public debt also comes into play. And of course, we also see how poor management of state-owned enterprises also permeates the management structure of state-owned enterprises to include operations such as public procurement, where there's corruption happening within that, and some of the provisions within the public procurement and disposal of public assets are not being followed. And of course, the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Act now allows for decentralization of public procurement to ministries, government departments, agencies, and parastatals, so they can do public procurement within their own entities, and PRAS retains the oversight role over the procurement. And of course, you see the corruption that was happening within the State Procurement Board being decentralized to individual entities within government departments. We continue with where we are dropping the ball. We have seen state-owned enterprises failing to meet their contractual obligations, even with employees. This ZIMCODD steel debt, which was assumed by the government, is one such where the employees were being owed. We have seen the ZESA and other parastatals actually borrowing to pay packages for employees that were leaving the institution. And of course, we see continued existence owing to bailouts from government, subsidies, and guaranteeing of loans from the state. Of course, I'll speak as we go about some of the exposés that came from the Auditor General's report in relation to some of the corruption tendencies and financial related scandals from state-owned enterprises. And of course, this speaks to institutions like Air Zimbabwe, Civil Aviation Authority, National Railways of Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, which technically became insolvent as a result of poor management. I think I will not speak more to this, but you would also see that there was also a lot of political interference in terms of the operations of state-owned enterprises. We've also seen the management boards and management of these institutions being overpaid in terms of salaries. I think you remember the Christmas issue. I think I'll show some of the hefty packages that were being given to the management at the expense of public service delivery. And of course, I mentioned the political leaders who have predatory tendencies, who preside over the same institutions and use them as conduits for primitive accumulation. And the use of the NASA scandal, I think, comes into play when you think about that. So this is the Bismarck scandal, where the group's chief executive was earning $230,000 a month. This is US dollars. Group finance either sits in parliament or have portfolios in cabinet that still decide in terms of how the debts should be dealt with. And that's a disservice to the citizens. And of course, I talked about the ZISCODD still debt. So I've talked about the contingent liabilities in which the borrowing by state guaranteed by the borrowing by state-owned enterprises guaranteed by the state implicitly or explicitly contributes to sovereign debt, making it part of the national debt and the government's overall debt burden. So that is number one. Sometimes governments claim that there is not a guarantee, but push social programs and spending through state-owned enterprises, where you have state-owned enterprises taking responsibility over public service delivery, and then the debt balloons as they are source for resources to provide such. And of course, just reflecting on the quasi-fiscal policies that were implemented by the Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, for instance, this is one typical example in which the government pushes certain services to certain entities, knowing that they're actually accumulating debt, which will be shouldered by the citizens. But this sometimes is just hiding the debt. But of course, ultimately, the government will accumulate in terms of its overall national debt burden, as what happened with the ZISCODD still debt and also the RBZ debt. With the ZISCODD still debt, so ZISCODD still was a state-owned enterprise. And this state-owned enterprise, it accumulated debt resulting from external loans of over 200 million, external supplies of over 6 million, this is US dollars, domestic loans acquired from CBZ and other institutions, 57 million, domestic suppliers, utilities, statutory obligations, where ZISCODD still was collecting the taxes and were supposed to remit the pay-as-you-earn to ZIMRA, but instead did not do the same. Where they are supposed to pay for ZESA, where they are supposed to pay for NASA, where they are supposed to pay for water and other utility bills, they did not, and the debt accumulated to that $219 million, US dollars. And I would also want to speak around the same, where an institution is operating and providing a service to ZISCODD still, and they are not being paid for the service. So the challenge is in accumulation of the debt, and at the same time killing the same entity of ZESA, ZINWA in terms of public service delivery, and ultimately the whole country is affected. Further breakdown, those were the external loans, Sino-Shua China, Japan, Germany, and also debts to external supplies. These were companies supplying them externally, domestic loans from government of Zimbabwe, CBZ, and you add this, it amounts to the 495 that I have mentioned earlier. And the same goes to the utilities. Look at the amount that was supposed to be paid to ZIMRA. 17 million in unremitted pay-as-you-earn. NASA contributions, 5 million. Corporate income tax, not paid. Standard Development Fund, ZIMRA VAT, municipality. So I want you to reflect and see how maladministration and poor governance of entities does not only affect the individual entity or the public debt state, but it also affects the ability of these institutions to provide a service. And this is then justified by way of assuming the same debt. And for your own information, this public debt is actually part of the debt that is now reported by the government of Zimbabwe, which you and I are supposed to shoulder. In terms of government announcements of other debts that they were supposed to assume, I've mentioned in 2018 they said they want to assume parastatal debts worth $1.1 billion coming from the NRZ, Air Zimbabwe, Civil Aviation, and of course there is still a plethora of other state-owned enterprises through which the government needs to assume the debts. And based on the same maladministration, these are the kind of debts that are owed by Air Zimbabwe, CARS, National Railways of Zimbabwe. And this information is in the Auditor General's report. So, Doc, when we talk about our nature of governance as a country, and I always mention that I don't see the seriousness and sincerity on the part of our leadership in terms of redefining the development trajectory of our country. We have these issues flagged out, but then they don't pay attention to it, and they continue business as usual. And of course, it is the responsibility of citizens to hold them to account and make sure that they perform accordingly. Then a little bit around state-owned enterprises and public procurement. I've mentioned the existence of a specific piece of legislation, Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Assets Act. This is a fair piece of legislation, despite the fact that it does not have provisions for public procurement during emergencies. But all things being constant, this is a fair piece of legislation. But of course, I've mentioned it gives autonomy to ministries, departments, and government agencies, state-owned enterprises to procure, and of course, have the PRAS as an oversight institution. But of course, we do have an Auditor General's report, the one for 2015, which identified some of the procurement-related irregularities in relation to how NASA was performing, ZIMRA, pension fund, and the medical aid societies that I've mentioned earlier on. And some of these parastatals failing to recover outstanding debts. The debts that I've mentioned earlier, that if a parastatal is owing another, you realize this still was owing ZINWA, NASA, ZESA, and other entities, and that paralyzes the same other institutions. And the Auditor General's report flags that out as a possible risk to the governance of certain institutions. We saw the same 2018 report. I'll just speak to the Pito Investments, where an entity is paid 4.9 million to provide transformers to ZESA. 9 years down the line, the transformers were not paid, were not delivered, yet payment was made to a particular entity. And the same entity was also paid an amount of over $500,000 6 years later, having not delivered, but paid again a certain amount, $500,000, for a service which they did not deliver. So this is a systematic way of corruption, which puts us in a very precarious condition as a country. And we always complain about the conditions of ZESA as an entity, as a parastatal, but of course certain individuals are actually getting rich out of this. And I repeat, our parastatals and state-owned enterprises are being used as conduits for self-enrichment. and the GMB, where a particular farmer is paid that amount to deliver maize, how do you pay over $1 million to say we expect you to deliver maize to GMB? And of course, several years later, the same maize is not delivered. How do you expect such entities to survive? So there are quite a lot that we can talk about in terms of the procurement-related irregularities and linking them to public debt. But of course, there's need for a comprehensive governance regime that allows for efficiency in the running of our own entities, in ensuring that they remain autonomous systems with autonomous management boards, which oversees the day-to-day running. And of course, the appointment of these should be on merit, not on political grounds, as it currently stands. If you see an individual who is strongly inclined to a political party, the next thing they are appointed to management boards and probably to run such institutions. And of course, we should have a governance system that allows these entities to run on a profit basis without compromising the provision of a particular service at a reasonable fee. I think I'll speak on and on about this, but I think for the interest of time, allow me to end here, Judith. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tafazwa. Do we have any interventions? None of our panelists are here, so we'll have to get ourselves to engage.
Thanks very much, Tafadwa. Just a few comments. That was quite an enlightening presentation. Just to disagree on one small thing, if you agree with me, I think in our search for lasting solutions, I think our characterization of the program, of the problem, is too conservative. I think when we say it's a problem of misgovernance, we are on the wrong side. We are underestimating the issues. I prefer to say we have criminal tendencies. Because when you say misgovernance, you're suggesting that someone is trying to govern, but because of maybe poor training or whatever, then they are missing the mark. But their effort being recognized, then we say it's misgovernance. But when someone goes out on a clear looting spree, and what is happening before us is not actually misgovernance, it's criminal. That is the characterization. Those are the ways, if we want to get closer to the problem we're dealing with, I think we need to characterize the problem objectively. The second issue is that we must note the impunity with which they operate. I think that is very important because it tells us how far they are prepared to respond to forces of law and order. Because it appears as if I think today they are arrested, tomorrow they are out, because they know you can do nothing about it. But there's something else you mentioned earlier on, not in this presentation, but in an earlier presentation you made. I really valued that. When you said there is a tendency for corruption. Corruption is not a static issue. It grows over time as it adjusts to your sense of consciousness. As you grow in terms of your own technology and your power as a nation, corruption also adjusts upwards to beat you. So I took that as a very serious indicator of a crisis that we are in, because it means if we combine the issue of criminality and the issue of impunity, and then we see these tendencies growing on a graph, one of those Mtulis graphs that go upwards, right? Then it means we are in a very dicey situation where the problem is growing faster than our capacity to handle it, which points towards the sense of agency, whichever, if it is political, if it is intergalactic, But whatever we are trying to do right now must grow faster than the rate at which the moral decay in our government is proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other?
A very interesting contribution, Tafazo. Thank you very much. The state enterprises and parastatals in Zimbabwe have not always been like this. This is a new phenomenon. In the past, these were efficient, effective delivering. That's the time when you said, Tafadzwa, they were contributing close to 40% of GDP in the country, which is, what percent is 40%? This is huge stuff. Almost half of the economy of this country is in the hands of state enterprises and parastatals. Actually, ladies and gentlemen, in China, most of the companies you see around here and say these are Chinese, those are state-owned enterprises. The guys who are doing, whether it's Kariba South or 7 and 8 or cement, most of these who are all over Africa, in the petro states, whether it is in Chad, whether it is in Nigeria, who are extracting oil, those are state-owned enterprises. But because of the way they are run from a commercial kind of thinking and paradigm. So they are run efficiently, and they are also getting funding from the banks, not from government. Government will take the money to the Chinese Development Bank or Chinese Export-Import Bank. Then the state-owned enterprise will get the money from the bank. So it is liable to the bank. Its liabilities are with the bank. It has to pay back to the bank. So as a result, the Chinese have got this model where they are doing well. Of course, in the past 3 weeks, some of you, if you have been following, there are challenges with some of them. But I wanted to underscore the point that it has not always been like this. They can be better. But the number 2 point I want to make, and you really made that point, but I just want to footnote you and say the problem of interparastatal debt, the debt of one parastatal to another, has created the ecologies of dysfunctionalities in our economy. Because if you've got one parastatal, which is huge, but is not paying its bills to NASA, to ZESA, to the water, to the city council, so it creates this web. So as a result, parastatals are responsible for the decay, for the economic and social ills that we have in this country. There is a need really to debunk the parastatals because they are responsible for the economic decay in this country, and they are used by government and state authorities for subsidies. Look at ZIMCODD. The buses that we were seeing last year and the other year, most of them were brought in by ZIMCODD, of course through some clandestine, as you know. But most of them, where are they now? They are parked somewhere. You don't see most of them. They are parked, they have not been maintained, they are dead. And we are going to pay, or we are already paying the debt. So the interparastatal debt is huge, my sister. It's a big problem. I wanted to add another point. When you said it's enrichment, self-enrichment, I think you needed to go beyond. Yes, there is a self-enrichment individuals, but there is also institutional benefits. Because when you say Pinto, you gave us an example where a parastatal pays 6 million and there's no delivery. Don't think it's not known by government. It could be money that has gone to a party And that is why no one will raise the issue. That money is said it has been paid to so and so, and there was no delivery. Actually, the money is not with that person. The money is somewhere in a political structure, is running a campaign, is running whatever things. So it's also beyond the individuals. There are also structures. So I call them, instead of just parastatals, I call them party-statals. We have party-statals in this country, and we have a paralysis of parastatals because of this kind of environment. Otherwise, I just wanted to add those. Thank you.
No, thank you. My voice is waking time, so now it's going to sleep. Apologies, but I'm sure I can hear you.
Yeah, Judith, do you expect me to say anything?
I don't know if you have anything to say.
Yeah, absolutely nothing to say. But of course, she just mentioned that, reiterating what the doc has said, to say that we have a very serious crisis in our country, a serious of impunity that Mkoma Masimba has mentioned. Even at home, ukaona mwana achita mskanzwa and you ignore it. All of them that comes after him or her will actually do the same. And there will be an incentive to do wrong. Because the incentive, when one is appointed, they do corruption, they are implicated by the Auditor General, and no action is taken against them. The next thing, when I step into the same office, look at NASA. The current management of NASA is on suspension. So each leadership that comes to assume the management of NASA, they actually step into the same corruption. Like I said, parastatals in Zimbabwe are a conduit for corruption, and of course we need a system change. Because the problem we have with our government is that we always talk about restructuring of parastatals without addressing the root causes that took us to where the parastatals are. And of course, a key conversation, Doc, should ensue from such conversations like this to ensure that even the government out there knows, because we are there as experts to identify where gaps are and of course take them to task. I think those are just my additions. Thank you.
Let's give Tafatwa a round of applause. Thank you very much. Before we go into the next session, let me just remind you there is an evaluation form that has been put next to you. Please, may you kindly fill it up. It will help in future planning of such programs. So please, kindly, objectively complete the evaluation form. In the morning, I asked whether there were people who had participated in similar conferences. And along the way, Masimba also said, we were in, did you say Rainbow Towers? Where we had a similar discussion, came up with similar recommendations and all that, right? So really, we want to move away from one, speaking to ourselves and not seeing change as it were. I also challenged you to say, where should we move the needle, right? So after the 8 hours that we have been here together, we want to be able to come up with resolutions, not just that as a box-ticking exercise, but where we think we can move the needle, right? So from all our deliberations, we just want to round up by highlighting a couple of resolutions that we can come up from our conversations. It was very clear from our deliberations that the debt is the elephant in the room. I think it was said over and over again. But it was also emphasized that, but we don't know the quantum of the debt that we have. And Doc challenged us and said, We are scratching where it's not itching. Is it deliberate? We have all been itched, and can you deliberately avoid where it's itching and you scratch the wrong position? So really, if we need to scratch where it's itching, where is it? What is it that we should do? Where should we scratch? So we don't necessarily want to come up with a whole book, but just a few recommendations that we think can summarize what we have deliberated on, what we aspire to see happening moving forward. So each one of us, I believe the organizers, invited each one of us deliberately because they believed you have value to add to this conversation. So please make it a task upon yourself to contribute to this conversation from what you have heard, the position that you have built as we were deliberating, and let's just come up with what we can call our resolutions from today's deliberation. No position is a wrong position. The Secretariat will clean it up, but let's share what we have. Please feel free to share, and she will capture. You can just capture them as people are saying. That's okay. But let's hear from people what we can come up as our resolutions from today's deliberations. You already have a position, so please just be able to capture what they are saying. If we had a way of connecting Top Bima, which type, so that, is that okay? And it will take us longer. So that she captures and we can see it on the board, or we can trust that she will just capture and then they'll clean it up. She can read afterwards, and it's just, so just capture them. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My two resolutions. Number one, I feel there is need to petition the Parliament of Zimbabwe, and with the following asks. One, instruct Auditor General to do a debt audit. This is something that we said we could do. So let's push Parliament through a petition to ask her to do that. Within the same petition, we could also ask Parliament to order Minister of Finance to disclose how the SDR funds were expended. And then number three, within again the same petition, to ask the Minister to disclose all debts. We know we have a lot of infrastructure that is being developed by the Chinese. We don't know whether there are donations or debts. We need that disclosed as well. It will gel in with the debt audit. Then number two, I'm not well familiar with the climate change bill, but I would have thought since it's in bill stage, there's opportunity for us to ask for provisions for climate change management funds, a pool of funds for that. I know Achi might have spoken to that, maybe might be well informed in terms of how best to coin that. And then number two, within the same bill, also try to find a way of merging the national climate policy to align with the environmental management policy, which puts together the EMA around environmental management. We have challenges around environmental disasters that lead to climate change disaster. So if there is a way of maybe aligning those two together so that whatever is done to the environment is in line with national climate policy. Thank you.
Would you mind if I have a piece of paper and give it to you? Thank you very much. This can help you as well. Any other?
Thank you. I feel that there is need to take this discourse on public debt management to the grassroots level, simplify things for citizens so that there is demand from the grassroots on this kind of information that we've been talking about that is missing.
I just want to add to what he said, because a voice that is only from the two organizations as it is now, without involving people on the ground, might seem as if it's still an elitist approach that we are taking. We need also voices from below and to involve other stakeholders who are important in this discourse.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. As for me, I think I've realized that there is another alternative to reduce the reliance on debt, which is taxation. So I'm proposing that we introduce progressive taxation in the form of, say, wealth tax and land tax. But there is a challenge in Zimbabwe, so we need the executive to be my public figures in terms of, what can I say, like what happens in USA where the president shares his tax liabilities with the public. We need them to lead by example, because the challenge that we meet in the tax arena is that they say they want us to pay tax, but they don't want to pay tax. So we need them to lead by example. But now, how do we do it? We need a national tax policy. So I think it's one of the things that we do. There's no national tax policy in Zimbabwe. We need to assist them, even as SCO, to craft a national tax policy so that we don't have what we call command taxation, but something that we agree as a nation. So I'll be very happy if we move a notion on, if the MPs move a notion on this one. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I would also suggest that maybe the model around financing of state-owned enterprises be changed. There are hybrid models like triple Ps which can be used so that they are not used as vehicles for corruption and other financial embezzlement tools. Thank you.
All right. And then this side, right?
Thank you, sis. I think our first paragraph must describe the problem of debt that we are facing right now. And that definition and that conceptualization must be different from the one that we did at our last meeting. It must highlight the severity of the problem and the complexity of the debt challenge before we start proffering solutions. The first paragraph must describe a debt problem that we have just realized in this conference, that it is very dangerous. It's based on values of impunity, destruction, and all that. And those words must feature, I think, in the definition of the problem. Then the next issue that we need to deal with is words that must come in our search for solution. We need agents, a sense of agency, and words like robust solutions in dealing with the debt issue. On a final note, I think there was raised an issue of taxation, national taxation policy, and the need to capture those people who earn money so that they contribute towards the debt, the resolution. I think this is very important, but we need also to highlight the need to stop chasing after petty taxations, like the poor taxing the vendors, because what is happening in this country in terms of the political economics of it, tax issues have become a class issue. The rich would rather not pay tax and have the poor pay the tax so that they can alleviate the debt burden. I think we need to move away from the taxation of the poor and gradually move in the direction of those who have wealth, including wealth that is actually not being accounted for right now, that is sitting in the... Even those gold coins, if they could be taxed. I'm sorry, I'm just pulling one, but thank you.
Thank you so much. So my recommendation is regarding the special drawing rights. I think let's continue to push parliaments to demand accountability from the Minister of Finance so that he submits disaggregated data on the utilization of special drawing rights, if possible, on a quarterly basis, so that we keep track with the utilization of the SDRs. Then my second recommendation would be for us, together with our government, to support the initiatives that are being done at African Union, whereby they are also demanding for advanced countries to donate their SDRs through multilateral institutions like African Development Banks, which will then use those donated SDRs for development of the continent. Thank you.
Whether you like it or not.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two for me. One is on parastatals. I think there is a need for a standing parliamentary committee, just like the Public Accounts Committee, Budget Committee. We need a state-owned and parastatals committee so that it can make follow-ups instead of waiting for the Auditor General's report. These problems that we see on a daily basis to be brought to the attention. Currently, if I understand, unless there's been changes, currently there is no standalone. It is as and when perhaps the Public Accounts or any other committee which feels, or if it is a transport committee, which will call a Zimbabwe or NRZ or something. I think we need a standing committee on that. But please do check. Unfortunately, Chichor is not here. We need to check first. If it is not there, that's the recommendation I am making. The other one is on arrears clearance. I think we need to appreciate that there is the appointment of the champion and things like that. But perhaps as a resolution, we need a comprehensive process or strategy that is inclusive of key stakeholders that is going to participate in the debt clearance, arrears clearance, and debt relief kind of a thing. So I'm trying to emphasize the involvement of AFRODAD, of ZIMCODD, to be part of this. So let's have a comprehensive process that is inclusive of key, not all. It can't be all, but at least key. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it is my understanding that this workshop was being recorded. So even this conversation is being recorded. So in the interest of time, I know you had suggested probably the rapporteur could read to us, but I don't think it's necessary. She can always go back to the recording to get the exact contributions of people. Before I ask Tatenta, who is the board of ZIMCODD, I'm sure, to give us the closing remarks, it means once he stands up, my powers are taken. I can't speak anymore. So let me just thank you for your participation throughout the day and your contributions. And we hope AFRODAD and ZIMCODD found this helpful towards developing the position that we want to develop. So thank you very much. Tatenda, can I please ask you to come forward?
Thank you. I nearly spoke to empty chairs, so thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. So very briefly, I would just want to give the concluding remarks. Perhaps to borrow from one of the doctors here, some grade 7 logic questions. Number one, is this whole debt question a neoliberal concept to keep Africa underdeveloped? Number two, does meticulous and efficient servicing of debt actually removes a country from the debt trap? If yes, do we have a precedence? Number 3 is actually Chuoniso's question. Who benefits from this debt crisis? Who are our biggest advisors and experts on this debt question? Are they the lenders themselves? Somebody once advised against going to the mosquito to ask for the solution of eradicating malaria, because sometimes the solution would involve eliminating the mosquito itself. I feel focus is too much on efficient debt servicing than pursuing other alternatives of looking at the root cause of what this brought about. There are historical issues on why Africa and the third world is in a situation that we are in terms of debt. Around 2000, there was the Jubilee 2000 concept and campaign, which pushed for the removal of debt for third world countries. I feel that the same attitude we also need to adopt and look at as we head towards AfCODD. But my brief is not to give you another speech, but to appreciate what we have been doing since morning. We have had a robust engagement from the academia, from Parliament. It would have been good to have the honourable members of Parliament and the government technocrats with us as we conclude. I have heard terminology such as consumptive issues. It is again my observation that instead of saying consumptive issues when we are talking about issues of social and economic needs, we can actually substitute that with livelihoods and survival issues. And I think this terminology comes about because of the absence of a broadened base of consultation and over-reliant on experts who don't involve the people who are actually affected by these things. So I urge all of us to continue with these conversations and to pick from the recommendations made, encourage organizations who are driving the process to find ways of making sure the ordinary person can relate their day-to-day challenges of absence of electricity, absence of water with the debt question, such that the momentum which then is generated into pursuing solutions to the debt crisis are reflective of the national mood. So it leaves me to thank you, colleagues, our presenters, our panelists, everybody who has participated, Judith for driving the process quite, eloquently and engagingly, and to thank the Secretariat of ZIMCODD again for doing the behind-the-scenes work. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Class dismissed. I was supposed to say that.